Alright, my name is David St. Louis, and I'm presenting on the topic of the need for standards-based curriculum in high school mathematics. Now, specifically, this has context for teachers in Kentucky right now, obviously with the rolling out of the new Common Core state standards. And what that has done for us is kind of done a lot of things to help identify what needs to be taught, and at the same time, it's brought about a lot of questions. So what we want to try and do is take a look at some literature and identify specifically, well, what are some things that we've seen statistics on and information to back up why there is a specific need for standards-based curriculum in high school mathematics, and how this specific curriculum is actually going to help us be more effective going forward. So, the curriculum that we've been working with right now, obviously in the context of that, has been implemented over the last 2 years. So last year and then this first half of the year. And we're being assessed in mathematics at the high school level on Algebra 2 in the spring. So what's affecting us right now is, specifically, first, identifying how to effectively implement the topics that we talked about, or the new standards that are being discussed. And with that, how also are we going to be effective in doing those things, and how are we going to be able to create a situation where we can identify positive results coming from our tests going forward. So, the question that we're asking, okay, is the implementation of standards-based curriculum in the high school mathematics classroom an effective way to raise student achievement? Specific. So what is standards-based curriculum? It's a connected effort to implement common benchmarks for students to achieve in classrooms nationwide. Now, standards obviously have been created by committees seeking to identify the most important points of interest for students going forward to be successful. Now, a lot of what we've done in the past, or the core content, has been based on what states in general have been focused on to be successful. So I think that this specifically is going to help us in the future. But one of the big questions is, first, I understand that we have moved tests around, we've done different tests, so why reform in the first place? So what has been wrong with us just adopting a textbook and going with that and teaching with that? First, it's about instructional opportunity. With the core content that we've had in the past, and with the Common Core now, we're identifying that we need to have a fair instructional opportunity for all students in the classroom. Now, that specifically talks to students within your school having a fair opportunity to get the education they need to get all concepts covered in the classes that they're taking, but also transient students, the increasing transient population in the country, switching from either school to school or district to district or even state to state. Now we've identified a way for students to actually identify a connected and consistent curriculum. Also, the instruction opportunity is based on the fact that we have clearly defined benchmarks that are being taught in all classrooms. And that's basically the main thing, is that even from teacher to teacher, where we may have different methods, we're still being clear that what the strengths are for the teacher, the same curriculum is being taught in the similar courses. So in mathematics, it's important that we build going forward, not teaching the same things over and over again, but that each student is given the opportunity to cover the maximum amount of content that we can as we go through, and to be prepared for what's coming for them. More specific assessment, I think, is another aspect of standards-based instruction, because it identifies for us how we're going to be assessed, what we're being assessed over, and specifically what the outcomes we're looking for are. I think one of the difficult things when talking about assessment with people is, how are we going to be assessed, what's it going to look like, and what are those things going to be for us? Well, with standards-based, we already have our standards outlined, we're clear on that, and we can identify from course to course even, from chapter to chapter, from section to section, if our students are ready to go forward and state whether or not they've met the benchmarks. And I think we know very clearly what content has been covered from year to year based on these specific assessments, and students have knowledge of this content, then it's not a question we have to ask year after year. Do you understand this? Have you seen this? And in the mathematics classroom, that's an important aspect as we build on everything going up the scale. As for other reasons, it's raising the standards. For teachers as well as for students. For teachers, it's raising the standard as this is the content you need to cover and it needs to get done. And it's an expectation that's being raised for teachers to become more effective in teaching so they can get through enough content, but also become aware of new methods. One of the articles we talked about in my paper discussed the idea that without making changes, without making new methods come into your classroom, without bringing in a reform in methodology, there's not necessarily going to be any kind of change in test scores. Now we know that with basic reform, whatever is emphasized is going to be something that's accentuated in our scores or in general learning at all. But with that, if we just give a new teacher a set of standards, we're identifying the fact that there's got to be higher standards with that we've got to also implement new instructional strategies to go along and to complement those so that we can achieve the given outcomes. Also, the current content, or the aligned content, is more specific about what we need to look at in terms of problem solving and high-level thinking. And in doing those things, we can be more specific about what students are going to have to do or identify, put more accountability back on students to be problem solvers and to be critical thinkers. Again, rigor. That just kind of goes along with that. Students will be able to measure their own progress, I think, and that's one of the nice things is that while we're doing this whole process, students are going to see the standards expected of them that they're going to be assessed on, and they'll be able to identify if they need more support on that. They'll be able to identify, kind of self-assess, and part of, I think, the great part about this is self-assessment is a huge part of growing as students and as individuals and even as teachers. And having that opportunity for students, because they can identify what the standards are that need to be covered, is a big part of being successful. So standards being the main idea there. But for us as teachers, for students, for parents, for administrators, what do we need to clarify in terms of the question marks? What questions are there about the negatives possibly of standards-based teaching, or possibly what do we need to do as teachers to become more effective? And I think one of the main things that I talked about originally was there's got to be reform in instruction. Okay, so one of the things to be aware of as teachers is that without that instruction, or without that reform in instruction, is not necessarily going to see any change. And there has to be a specific emphasis put on professional development and applying new strategies, reconsidering methods, structuring units, working together on assessments, collaboration, so that you aren't just being stale in your teaching. You're being proactive and trying to create a structured curriculum that's going to meet these standards and allow these kids to get there. Students are going to have to show mastery in a lot of these areas, and identifying mastery and identifying how to find mastery is going to be a change for a lot of people. Instead of just going from here's a problem, solve it, identifying in situational problems how to solve those. Also, teachers are asked to follow best practices going forward to better facilitate learning. Reforming and accountability. And what does that look like for us? And we're not really aware of that in some sense yet. In standards-based learning, those questions are that idea is answered. You know, in standards-based learning, the accountability is on the individual and on the teacher specifically. Now, we can see that when we identify and go through and identify what things need to be discussed still. What areas are we weak in? Where's the accountability at? Now, with the testing, obviously we can see from year to year where that works, but with accountability you need to identify that there are problems possibly in accountability of, wow, teachers are being held accountable to get these students to identify where their gaps are in learning. Students don't necessarily have the accountability they have had in previous situations. So, will students be required to pass these on-the-course assessments? Will specific teachers be held accountable for the courses they teach? Is it not just the whole math department, it's the Algebra 2 teacher in this case? And then how will schools be held accountable for students if it goes both ways? So that's something to be wary of and kind of identify and watch as we go forward here. Are students going to have to buy into this, or are they going to kind of just be role players to some extent? Reform and assessment. Now for us, there's a lot of questions right there. Okay, reform and assessment with standards-based though means changing it out from these are good questions I think I should use for my test to, okay, what's going to be best to meet these standards, and rethinking those standards. And that's a positive change, I think, in how we're considering that. Without that reform, I think we're getting, again, stay on what we're doing and not being effective in going forward from there. For us, on the current standards, there's still question marks. What will be the new assessment that will look like? When will it be given? How we prepare our students if we don't have the test? These are things we need to consider as possible negatives in the whole process. This is a very uncomfortable situation for, I know Algebra 2 teachers at this point, because of the fact that they're going to be assessed, but they're not sure what that's going to look like. And as we go forward here, that's something to be aware of in all standards-based assessment, is being aware up front, as we have the standards, to go backwards, and it's a warning, I guess, for us in the future. Student accountability. Okay, we're talking about accountability for us as teachers and a little bit as students, but again, what else is it going to take for students to buy in? Now, is it going to be a passing grade that is going to go with that? Do we give students the value of that? One of the studies we looked at talked about Canadian schools and the different provinces. Now, some of them have end-of-course assessments, 40 to 50% of their grades. No grade, or 10% of your grade, 20% of your grade on these end-of-course assessments. And what happened is students were moving significantly higher. 6/10 or 7/10 basically of a grade level, basically higher, when these assessments counted for more.